Hello. I want to talk to you about the groundbreaking exhibition that is garnering acclaim right now in Adelaide at the Art Gallery, and it features the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. Well, today we'd see Frida Kahlo as one of the most influential, one of the most recognizable of all 20th century Mexican artists. Who was Frida Kahlo? Well, Frida Kahlo was born in Mexico City. She was born in 1907 and she would die 47 years later in 1954. But in her tragically short life, she made the best of possibilities. This is a painting that Frida Kahlo did as an adult about her antecedents. She called this My Grandparents, My Parents, and I. In fact, there are two I's. There's Frida as the fetus in her mother's stomach, but there's also little Frida in the courtyard of the famous Blue House, where she was born and where she would eventually die. Now, her mother was a fairly conventional character. Frida was actually much closer to her father, Guillermo Kahlo, who arrived penniless at the age of 19 in Mexico. He came from Germany, and Frida always said that he was Hungarian Jewish. And in Mexico, he became an important photographer. So Frida would have learned a lot from her father. Now, if you have a photographer for a father, it stands to reason that you're going to have quite an archive of photographs of yourself growing up. And this is little Frida at the age of 4. Well, when Frida was 6, she was unlucky enough to contract polio. She was left with a withered leg, but she did make a tolerably good recovery, and she would later say that she'd been quite a tomboy. At the age of 18, however, a much worse catastrophe was to come. This little image that she did in pencil on paper, she did it actually 1 year after the event, so she did it in 1926, but it was in 1925 that she sustained this terrible accident. And as she shows here, she was virtually left for dead. She was traveling home on a bus, and her bus was in a collision with a tram, and her injuries were incredibly severe. She was pierced through the stomach by a metal handrail, and she had fractures of the spine and the right leg. Well, of course, she would have to spend time in hospital. She would then have to spend time recuperating at home. She planned to become a doctor. She thought she would go to medical school, but now she was stuck at home, and perhaps to get rid of the boredom, she taught herself to paint. And this is one of the first paintings that she did then at the age of 18. She would later say she'd been inspired at the outset by Botticelli, so she's painted herself here rather like a kind of Renaissance princess. Well, the curators of the exhibition at the Adelaide Art Gallery have called this Love and Revolution. Why love? Well, because of the long and passionate attachment that Frida would have to the artist Diego Rivera. And this painting that Frida did in 1942 shows the artist Diego Rivera, later her husband, imprinted on her brow. As I say, this was a lifelong and very passionate attachment. Who was Diego Rivera? Well, he was a very celebrated muralist. You can see him doing one of his panoramic images. All his life, Rivera was inspired when he was painting his mural paintings by Mexico's long and complex history. Well, when Rivera was a boy, he was born in 1886. He would outlive Frida. He would die in 1957. Well, when Rivera was a boy, Mexico was a profoundly unequal place. Well, everything would change in 1910 with the explosion of the Mexican Revolution. Before the revolution, you'd had wealthy families who controlled most of the land and its resources. So the aim of the Mexican Revolution was to redistribute the land and to achieve greater social justice. And Frida and Diego were bonded really by their commitment to those revolutionary ideals. Well, this is a detail from a large and panoramic mural by Diego Rivera that he did in the 1940s, showing the Mexican Revolution. You can see the iconic mustachioed figure there of Emiliano Zapata, and he's holding one end of the banner, Tierra y Libertad, land and liberty. Well, Frida and Diego were married in 1929. This hand-colored photograph shows them on their wedding day. Diego Rivera, you see here, already 42 years old and extremely celebrated, and by his side the diminutive figure of his new wife, Frida Kahlo, barely 22 years old and just at the start of her painting career. Well, Frida and Diego were also united by their passion for all things Mexican. You've got to think that Spain had been the controller, really, of Mexico for 300 years. Mexico had been conquered by Spain in 1521. And those earlier civilizations, the Aztecs, the Maya, and so on, had been very downplayed by those Spanish conquistadores. Well, not so now, because after the revolution, figures like Frida and Diego were going to proclaim the importance of those ancient civilizations and their art. Frida here is holding up a much-loved jade figurine made over 1,000 years ago by the Olmec civilization. Well, Frida and Diego also loved the art of their own time, the art of the folk artists who peopled Mexico. You see Frida Kahlo here with some of her collection. She had a huge collection of toys and pottery. She had huge admiration for the ingenuity, the skill of all those peoples in Mexico. Still 60 languages are spoken in Mexico as they were in Frida's day. And Frida also loved to wear Mexican clothing. It was all about channeling her Mexican identity. She took such pride in her Mexican heritage, and that included the wearing of traditional dress, traditional jewelry. She wore this because she thought it was beautiful, but it was also her way of allying herself with all those indigenous cultures. Well, Diego Rivera, as we've said, was also, like Frida, passionate about Mexican culture. He didn't just paint walls as a muralist, he also did a lot of paintings on canvas, like this one, showing you two vendors of calla lilies in one of Mexico City's many markets. And they, like Frida, are wearing their own indigenous dress. It's all about proclaiming their identity. We chiefly remember Frida today for some of these haunting self-portraits. We know of at least 60 self-portraits that Frida did. And of course, in this self-portrait, as in real life, Frida was wearing her Mexican clothing with pride. She shows herself here with her spider monkey. She had other Mexican animals, Mexican birds, parrots, also Mexican hairless dogs. And of course, in the garden of her house, it was filled with Mexican plants. As we said, it was all about Mexicanidad, the search for Mexico's roots. But Frida was often asked by friends why she painted herself so often. And she would reply, I paint myself because I am the subject that I know best and because I am so often alone. Well, Frida died, as we've said, in 1954 at the age of 47. Well, not many women who died so long ago could be said to be a fashion icon today. And yet this photograph that was taken of her in 1939 appeared recently on the cover of Vogue magazine. Fashion designers endlessly channel Frida's flamboyant sense of dress, her outre and flamboyant sense of self. Well, the exhibition in Adelaide doesn't just focus on Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. This was a golden age in Mexico. There were many artists, many photographers. You can see the work here of Maria Izquierdo. She did this in the 1940s. And you can also see photographs by Manuel Alvarez Bravo. This photograph of Frida Kahlo he also took in the 1940s. So as you can see, there is much to admire right now in Adelaide. Well, I'm sitting in London talking to you, but I really wish that I were there in this exhibition, which celebrates all those golden artists of that fantastically creative period. Thank you very much.